canto a la derecha, adelante está allá.
So we are here at the Venice Biennale 2024 to celebrate the work of Pablo Delano and his installation, Museum of the Old Colony. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling exhilarated and uplifted. The model that you saw in Hartford has been transformed from a small-scale model on a desktop to a full-fledged installation that takes up almost 2,800 square feet. Venice is a huge challenge. For any artist, it's a challenge to think about how your work is going to be perceived in an international space like this, with visitors coming from all over the world, and specifically in my project, which deals with my homeland. At the same time, I think I want to make it relatable. There are issues, believe it or not, that Puerto Rico and Venice have in common. I wanted to tap into those. One of those issues is the question of tourism. Both locations are very tourist dependent for their economy. So there's a section in this iteration of the installation that deals specifically with tourism, and I think it can be read in both levels, as the local level where it deals specifically with Puerto Rico, but then on a broader level that those problems exist here in Venice as well.
Can you talk a little bit about your reactions to or perspectives of the audiences at Venice?
The most dramatic thing is just the sheer volume. On any given day, the gallery can have 200 or 300 people in it at a time, and that's a little bit overwhelming. The international audience is quite different. I find very little resistance to accepting the notion that Puerto Rico is a colonial possession of the U.S., and it's very rewarding to see the impact the work is having on the viewers.
So what has Trinity's role been in this installation?
The first version of this project was exhibited in Trinidad as part of a conference that was supported by Trinity College. With this achievement of being invited to the Biennale, Trinity really stepped up and made it possible for me to participate in this in many ways. In addition to directly supporting the project, being in an environment with colleagues who are willing to share their knowledge and their expertise with me and engage in a discussion is really incredibly valuable. Do you see your input in what I did here?
When I first experienced it, it was at NYU, and at that point, it was entirely photographic. So to see the ways in which the installation has expanded, to see the ways in which your art practice has grown to now have 3D objects and have objects be in conversation with photography is tremendous. I think you're telling such more dynamic stories. Thinking about, for example, the museum desk and the ways in which just how it's evolved in this iteration. And now there's a second desk, there's a student desk.
The desk itself ended up being part of this installation by a purely random act. In an earlier version of the installation, I visited the gallery where the exhibit was going to take place. There was a desk in the middle of the space, and the gallery director immediately assured me that that would be removed. But when I saw it there, it sparked an idea. Well, if I'm following up on this whole notion of what is a museum and what are some of the characteristics of museums, you always have a desk when you enter, and there's always an attendant sitting at that desk. So I said, no, wait a minute, leave the desk and let me use it. So that was the beginning of this whole concept of the desk. It became more of a tableau and more of a sculptural piece. And every time that I've included the desk, I've added more and more and more and more and more objects to it. It becomes sort of the center of power of the imaginary person who runs the museum.
Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between the museum desk and the student desk?
One of the stories I thought would be compelling to tell here in Venice is the suppression of the Spanish language. To Americanize people, one of those components were photographs of children being taught English. As with many parts of the exhibit where there are echoes and references, it might be interesting to have the adult desk and then its little sibling, the student desk, and the objects that are placed upon it, which are a textbook that teaches English and, ironically, also a textbook that teaches Spanish, but is marked on the back, property of the government of Puerto Rico, written in English.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of visual imagery in the show?
I began about 20 years ago to collect imagery produced by outsiders, the colonizer. It's a kind of a morbid fascination with this kind of imagery that led me down the road to figuring out how I might integrate that into an actual work of art. Photographers were sent all over the world to make these photographs, so I thought that those were an important way to introduce the U.S. invasion of Puerto Rico and the beginning of the U.S. colonization.
What are your aspirations moving forward for both the installation and your art practice?
Well, based on the feedback that I've had here from the people I've met and the contacts I've made, I'm hoping that the installation will continue to live on. You know, having the opportunity to be on this stage in this specific spot in the center of the central pavilion of the Biennale de Venezia is an incredible honor, and it's also an incredible responsibility in the sense that I'm representing what I would describe as a colonial trauma.